Pharmophobic is powered by Achieve the Lifestyle, a company dedicated to helping you empower your health, redefine your lifestyle, and all for the health of it. You're listening to Pharmophobic, where we challenge the state of health in America. I'm Janie, a physician assistant, and I've seen how healthcare keeps people dependent instead of truly healthy.
And I'm Dan, a veteran turned fitness pro here to uncover the truth and explore simple and sustainable health solutions. From big pharma to big food, we're exposing the conflicts of interest keeping us sick and finding better ways to take back our health.
No fluff, no gimmicks, just real talk, real solutions, and a little bit of fun along the way.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of Pharmophobic. I'm Dan.
And I'm Janie.
And today we're here basically like every other day. We're here to help you achieve your strongest, healthiest, and most capable self. Okay, and with that, we're going to talk today about a topic that might blow some minds because a lot of stuff that's been quote unquote true out in the mainstream when regards to health might be questioned today. Okay.
Right.
With that in mind, we want to talk about a little bit of environmentals here, like paradigm shifting, changing your mind. What do you do when confronted with contrarian information or information that contradicts stuff that you've believed for a long time?
Right. And I think what we've nodded to in previous episodes is we just ask that you remain curious. Mm-hmm. Okay. And even though something, I've dealt with this personally where I went through conventional medicine training as a physician assistant, and there was things that I, would die on a hill for, and then confronted with alternative information that contradicted that, it's very uncomfortable, but it's just remaining curious. There's nothing wrong with questioning things and looking into things further. And I think a lot of people don't like when people question things.
Yeah, and I don't understand, even if the thing that's been the really popular expression that kind of makes my head hurt a little bit over the past couple of years, the follow the science thing. I've grew up with the science where things got updated, things got questioned all the time. Isn't that the scientific method, right?
Yeah.
So when we say, if we're going to say follow the science, there's follow the science with the $sign instead of an S. Today we're going to talk about follow the science with the actual S.
Right. It seems a bit hypocritical if somebody says follow the science and then you question it and they're like,
the science is settled. It's unquestionable.
Well, that's the whole point of the scientific process is we're continually questioning things because science is evolving. I mean, there was one point when things were thought to be great that we know aren't because it was continually questioned and tested.
Yep. And one thing when breaking paradigms and questioning things that have been sold to us as true, something that I tell people all the time, and you've heard this expression, is follow the money. Who stands to make inordinate amounts of money if something is believed to be true, and who makes money if it's not? Usually what you'll find is that what you've been sold out in the mainstream is somebody's making billions of dollars off of it. And then the opposite, if the opposite were true, or that information that's making billions of dollars gets debunked, the debunker or debunking situation doesn't really make any money.
Right. And on that, as we go through this episode, I want people to keep in mind that two things can be true at the same time. Okay. And so, for example, Dan was saying follow the money. So people could be making a lot of money off of a given pharmaceutical, but there is a small set of people who do truly benefit and they are doing some good with that. So two things can be true. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that I'll reiterate that again during certain points of this episode because we are going to challenge some very popular organizations that do a lot of good things, but may be leading us down the wrong pathway.
Yeah, and also like I think, and I went through this as I sit there and research stuff. I'm driven by curiosity. Both of us are. We're driven by curiosity first, and then as we start reading and seeing things, and I've believed this thing for this many years, and then I see that the opposite is true. There's a moment there where you get really uncomfortable, right? And it kind of you don't know because your ego is under attack and you're like, man, I'm not an idiot. And I believe this to be true. And now I'm seeing information that basically confirms or tells me that I was acting like that I was duped. I was bamboozled. The okey doke got pulled on me. So it hurts a little bit in the ego. But if you can push through that, then you land in this place where you're ready for growth. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So what I'm appealing to here is curiosity. Be curious and ask deeper questions. Why? How? This sort of thing. And don't just be like, oh, well, that's not true. Because CNN told me that wasn't true. Don't go there. Don't go there. And with that in mind, I have a little hat for you that I want you to wear today, okay? So we're proverbially, let's put our tinfoil hats on for a second. You'll find that it's not really tinfoily. It's more truth than anything, okay?
All right, so let's quit teasing the people and get to what we're going to talk about today.
So today we're going to talk about Ancel Keys. And we're going to talk, Ancel Keys was a researcher. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about the food pyramid as we've known it most our lives. And the food pyramid now, it supposedly got updated during the Obama years, but it looks very similar to what the other one looked like. So we're going to talk about that, dietary guidelines, like mainstream dietary guidelines as provided to us by who? Harvard, dietetics, whatever in the world these people are, title. So mainstream dietary guidelines, we're going to talk about that and how Ancel Keys relates to what we have as a mainstream dietary guidelines. Mm-hmm. Right. Anything you want to add there?
No. I think we're just really going to hit on Ancel Keys and his relationship with the American Heart Association, and then that relationship and how that affects us all on a day-to-day basis.
Yep. So Ancel Keys, he lived 100 years. I didn't know this. 1904 to 2004. Died in 2004. Yeah. I bet you he wasn't following his dietary guidelines to live 100 years.
We don't know that. Yeah.
We can't confirm that, but I'll put some money on that.
Yeah.
Be like, go to Ancel Keys' house, and that boy was having ribeyes every night.
Okay.
I promise you. Anyway, the whole thing, this man, his undergrad studies were in poli-sci and zoology.
Yeah.
Interesting, right? And then later on, he went to study like a PhD in physiology.
Right.
What did he? So he was a physiologist, right? Now, what he is most known for prior to the study that gave us the dietary guidelines that we have today, he supposedly took part in developing the K rations during World War II. Mm-hmm. So as those ready-to-eat meals that soldiers were eating during World War II, he took part in developing that, and they say that's why they called it a K ration, so Keys, after his last name. Now, for military guys, the K rations are the precursor to our beloved MREs. Mm-hmm. I say beloved with parentheses there. Anyway,
quotations.
Yeah, quotations. Yes. Yeah. Oh, quotations. Do you see parentheses? Quotations. Yeah, our beloved MREs. Anyway. And then he went on to this thing called the 7-country study.
So just prior to that, he developed the heart hype theory, basically saying that he could figure out an equation is if you decrease cholesterol so much, it can provide. He developed an equation saying how much one's cholesterol would decrease with a specific dose of polyunsaturated fats.
Okay. And basically. And
then from there, he went to the 7-country study.
Okay. So what precursor to the 7-country study, what made him curious about heart disease? Eisenhower in the 50s, President Eisenhower, he had a heart attack, supposedly 55 was the year.
And Eisenhower's a military guy, right?
Yes. He was a 5-star general during World War II. So he was one of the highest ranking generals commanding the
And he's
US
from
forces.
Kansas.
There you go. He's from Kansas too. So and then after World War II, he went on to become president. So he had a heart attack in the 50s, and then the fact that he had a heart attack, it brought attention to heart disease.
Right.
Which, if we compare heart disease in the 50s to what it is now, we are exponentially times 25 way beating the numbers that they had back then. But anyway.
Right. But you also have to remember that in the 50s, we didn't have acute interventions such as taking somebody to the cath lab, doing a cabbage, so bypass surgeries if they had a heart attack. So it wasn't just like, oh, I had a heart attack, had to be rushed to the hospital, had a bypass. In the 50s, it was you had a heart attack, die. So there's a lot of men in their 40s and 50s dropping and a lot within, reason 50s, because Dan mentioned in the 50s is much less than now. But I would say that the fear was higher because there wasn't an acute intervention at that time.
And when you see somebody like Eisenhower go down, like he was this, war hero,
right,
fearless leader, hard man, and people are like, holy crap, if he could get a heart attack or he could have a heart attack, then what's going to be of the rest of us? But you also got to remember what was happening in the 50s, even though there was less obesity, less diabetes, but I think smoking was a very regular thing in the 50s.
Smoking was a regular thing because I know it was in Vietnam. I don't know about World War II that cigarettes were given as rations.
Yes, they were.
In World War II?
Yeah,
okay, I didn't know for sure.
Yeah, so smoking was way more commonplace back then. Drinking, like nightcaps, I'm not saying alcoholic levels of drinking, but common levels of drinking, like I'm going to have a little nightcap, and things like that were more common. And then they weren't as sedentary, but they also didn't work out. They weren't as physically, like the levels of fitness were probably, general fitness were probably lower because there weren't such thing as gyms and things like that.
But I feel like and I may be wrong, but I feel in the 50s, people did more labor.
Yeah, they were
jobs.
definitely
like machines weren't as big, and also people, farming equipment probably wasn't as prevalent, and there were probably more farmers in the 50s, I would say.
Yeah.
So people were out like working the fields, things like that, and then cars.
They walked more. So obesity was not an issue in the 50s. It was not.
So general fitness, I think, like just
as we know it
for
today.
activities of daily living. And longevity, I think, were probably higher. People weren't as sedentary.
You're right. So sedentarism was not a thing. Obesity was not a thing by design, pretty much.
I don't even think TVs were a thing in the 50s,
No. They started coming out. Nobody was sitting consuming hours and hours of TV. It was radio was their thing back then, but nobody was sitting there consuming hours and hours of it with no end. People walked more, they moved more. Jobs were more physically intensive. Yeah. So there wasn't, we didn't have this obesity crisis. We didn't have the diabetes thing just roaring. And heart disease really wasn't roaring, but it was starting to come up.
Right.
So Eisenhower has a heart attack. And then it goes into, it brought light to the attention of heart disease. It brought light to the issue of heart disease. Wow.
Right.
Anyway.
So it's the same thing as like right now there's that question of like, is violence really more prevalent now? Or are we just seeing it more because it's condensed in our daily consumption of social media or whatever, right? So heart disease wasn't at the levels it was now in the 50s, but because Eisenhower had a cardiac event, was it just more in the newspapers? And so it was in everyone's faces.
Yeah, it was top of mind for sure.
Yeah.
And what happened here, Mr. Keys, he basically started looking at, he was in Minnesota at the time. He started looking at Minnesota businessmen, wealthier individuals that supposedly ate more because they were wealthier. And he was seeing, supposedly, that heart disease was more common in these people that ate more. And then he, from there, went on to generate the hypotheses that saturated fat, meaning animal fats, so eating meat, butter, dairy, that sort of thing, raised cholesterol levels and therefore put people at higher risk of heart disease.
Right.
Then he went on in 1960. So 1960, 58 really was when they commissioned the study. It took 2 years. 60, they finished it. And then 66, they published it. So the 7-country study. So he basically went and looked at 7 countries, Italy was in there. He was looking at countries that supposedly had more longevity. So similar to the blue zone theory.
So Japan,
Italy, I think he
Greece.
went to the Netherlands, Greece. He went to Italy. And then from there, he was basically taking snapshots of their diets, and he concluded that these people didn't consume saturated fats as much as Americans did. Therefore, their heart disease risk was lower.
Right. So like two ends of the extreme would be like Japan intakes low amounts of fat. They have very low amounts of heart attacks compared to the U.S., higher amounts of fat, much more heart attacks. And so he used that. But the problem was that there was a lot of flaws in his study. Some of them you found were...
So the criticisms of the study. So Greece, when he went to Greece, he supposedly the sample that they took of dietary, behavior was during Lent, when people are known to give bunch of stuff up.
Yeah, they don't eat meat.
They don't eat meat. People will do that sort of thing for Lent. So he picked Greece during Lent. And then he also eliminated countries from the study that didn't fit the criteria. So a country like France was eliminated. That's a very high fat diet, very low heart disease country, supposedly, at least back then. He took that out of the study. So he took things that supposedly fit what he was looking for and disregarded things that didn't fit what he was looking for.
So the way he did the study did show that lower saturated fat intake equaled lower heart attacks. But then all the countries that he disregarded from the study, somebody later on went and populated them into the data, and it makes the studies just irrelevant. And then he also used other methods to support the results that just were not.
Yeah, it was a causation equals correlation type of thing.
Yeah.
Or correlation equals causation.
And then you mentioned the Minnesota experiment, which was actually thought to be one of the best experiments out there because they had great controls. Things were randomized. It was such a big study with a bunch of controlled variables in it that if they were to be able to yield results, they would be really valid and strong. However, they stopped it because they found that when they did it, if they decreased cholesterol by using vegetable oils, it did not show the assumed benefit that I mentioned earlier, that increasing polyunsaturated fatty acids would decrease risk of heart attack.
Yeah, that study, that was 73.
Yeah. But hold on, let me finish. I'm sorry. It didn't get the assumed benefit of lowering cardiac risk, and it also increased cancer risk. Now you're like, but I've never heard of this. That's because the results were hid in a basement.
So, 73, this study that Janie's talking about, the Minnesota cardiovascular study thing, those results were never fully published. And what they were doing there, they were artificially increasing the concentration of linoleic acid in people's diets.
And where do people find linoleic acid?
That would be vegetable oils or polyunsaturated fats, such as canola, such as soybeans, such as cottonseed oil. They were basically artificially increasing the amount of linoleic acid with the hopes that, we're going to prove that polyunsaturated fats decrease cardiovascular risk. Mm-hmm. And what they ended up finding was the exact opposite. Mm-hmm. There was no effect on mortality risk or cardiovascular disease risk by increasing polyunsaturated fats. And to Janie's point there, they actually found that it could actually cause cancer as well, increase cancers, like bumping up the linoleic acid that much.
So they aborted the study early.
Yep. So now think about this. 73, they never really published this study, but they would use excerpts from the study throughout the years. Mm-hmm. Okay, so little snapshots were used in medical conferences and things like that, and like CME type stuff for doctors. They would just use little snippets of it in 73. Now, nobody saw the full study until now. Pause. Anybody know any researchers that get all these money, all these grants to run a study, and then they don't publish results for years. And then, or moreover, they never publish. Okay? They never publish the full thing after people gave you all this money to conduct the study. I never seen that happen. I don't, they're eager to publish the results, right?
Yeah.
So 73 never published. The full study was found in 2013 in the house of this guy, Ivan France, who was his collaborator on the
basement,
73 study. The dude died, and they went through his estate, and they found the full study where it basically laid out that, hey, listen, all this polyunsaturated fat and raising and putting all this linoleic acid into people, it wasn't doing anything for heart disease. And not only that, it was actually making people sicker.
Yeah. And, who funded that study was the American Heart Association.
Whoa.
Okay. And so there are ties between the American Heart Association and Ancel Keys and Crisco.
We gotta go back for Crisco.
So the American Heart Association originally was like this small collaboration of cardiologists. They didn't have much funding, and they were trying to figure out how to really come up. They received a ton of money in, I have little note cards here. I don't think I wrote down when they received the money. No. So they received a lot of money.
We know who gave them the money, though.
Yes. So Procter & Gamble.
Mm-hmm. That name sound familiar, guys?
Who makes Crisco?
Crisco isn't their original claim to fame, though. Because Procter & Gamble is wait for it, pharmaceutical company.
Oh.
But Procter & Gamble also makes very common products like ivory, soap.
Right.
They have a bunch of beauty products as well. And they made Crisco, which is probably what threw them over the top money-wise.
Yeah. So Procter & Gamble had an awards show. I don't know the absolute details of these, but basically had a radio show that would give a reward to somebody, right? And there is a person specifically who facilitated the American Heart Association winning this radio show reward, which gave them, I think, over $1 million back then in like the 50s. So that, I don't know what that equates to right now, but it's a lot of money, right?
It's a significant amount of money.
And that person who facilitated the American Heart Association getting the money from Procter & Gamble because he saw that Ancel Keys was saying, hey, lower saturated fat, decrease heart risks. Procter & Gamble had Crisco, which can take the place of tallow, butter, lard in cooking. Let's give this money to the AHA so then they can facilitate Ancel Keys' recommendations to lower saturated fat. Now Procter & Gamble can come in with Crisco and benefit. And that person was by the last name of Bernays. Who's Bernays?
Current owner of Netflix.
His son or nephew is or son.
Nephew, son, somebody by the last name Bernays.
But this Bernays specifically, his uncle is Sigmund Freud.
Man, that's rabbit hole territory.
So
right there.
The level of understanding that this Bernays gentleman had of human psychology, being able to manipulate people, or manipulate may be an aggressive word.
Control information,
portray information in a way that really captures people. That's right here is where I want you to say, why is nobody questioning this? I'm curious about this. How does this influence me? How is this okay?
Yeah, I think also Crisco, if you're our age or older, it's something that's very familiar to you. I'm sure every single household in America,
my mom still does,
had a tub of Crisco.
One step away of just throwing it away next time I'm there.
I mean, I'm sure if you're our age or older, you've seen a tub of Crisco in your mama's kitchen, in your grandmama's kitchen, and you've tasted a lot of food cooked with Crisco. What is Crisco exactly? So Procter & Gamble were making ivory soap. This is 1900s, early on in the 1900s, which now sounds like a freaking millennia ago. when I say I was born in 1983. But anyway, there is a byproduct to making soap. Okay? It's cottonseed oil. It's literally residue, just what's left after they make their soap. And yes, it's related to the seed of the cotton. But anyway, they were spending a lot of money to get rid of that byproduct. So they figured out a way by hydrogenating it, turning it into a solid, and then they started marketing that as an oil to replace lard, tallow, butter, that sort of thing for people to cook with it.
Yeah. And so just kind of picture this. You're in the 50s. People are dying of heart attacks. It's in the forefront of the news, like we talked about with Eisenhower.
And Crisco had been around, like I said, this goes back to the 1900s, but now we're in the 50s. So they had this product for a long time,
and women
but
were
it never caught steam.
Yeah. And women were primarily in the kitchen cooking, right? In the homes, okay? They didn't want to use Crisco.
Yep.
It's gross. Nope. Let me stick with my tallow, butter, lard, fine. But now here comes the, marketing of cholesterol is bad, men are dying of heart attacks, decrease cholesterol, decrease heart attack risk. Well, now being the provider of preparing food for my family, if I use Crisco, I can save my husband's life. That's pretty powerful.
Yep.
Right?
I'm being healthier if I use this synthetic option.
And it's less expensive.
That's always, yes. So there goes to convenience, multiple ways, which, we should definitely go in on how things.
Oh, we're going to do an episode about convenience.
Yeah, because convenience, 9 out of 10, there's a level of convenience that when you exceed that, you're actually working against yourself. This is definitely the case with Crisco and things of that nature. And, we could talk about fast foods and so forth there. But this whole thing with Crisco, I just want you to go back and think about where it came from, y'all. Soap.
Did you ever get your mouth washed out with soap as a kid? I did.
No, they would threaten us with that but in Puerto Rico, we had some a little bit more effective than washing your mouth out with soap when you were saying words that you shouldn't. Do you know what that is?
What?
A smack in the mouth from your mama.
I tried to question my parents' bluff one time about washing my mouth out. I lost that.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times, shout out, Mom. Love you, Mom. How many times my mom just gave me like a swift backhand that came out of nowhere. What the? In the mouth. And I was just like, oh my God. Because I said just cussed openly. Hilarious stuff. But
anyway, sorry. So Crisco's from soap.
Yeah, it's a byproduct of making soap. It's literally the stuff that they can't use for anything else after they make soap.
Right.
Think about that for a second. Okay? And listen, I ate plenty of Crisco growing up, y'all. Like if it's fried, I'm from Puerto Rico, they fry a lot of stuff. Crisco's in it. We put that stuff in making, even in the rice they would put. I mean, crap. A lot of us have eaten a lot of Crisco. Yeah. It's a byproduct of making soap. Think about that. Yeah. How is this supposed, would you just shave off some soap and throw it in your pan before you put your freaking eggs in there? Would you do that? I don't know. I'm just asking questions. I'm just a guy asking questions.
And we're not going to get into it right now, but if you are curious, you can look at the whole process by which it goes from soap to Crisco and see the chemical reactions that take place to make that happen. And then you can come to your own conclusion on, is that good for me or is that not?
Yeah, I think just by the way it's made, you should start asking yourself certain questions. But anyway, Procter & Gamble has this product that's basically not moving as they want it to. And then there's this opportunity here to sell polyunsaturated fats instead of the animal fats that people have been using for ages.
Right.
Because they made this product in the earlier 1900s and it wasn't catching. But then in the 50s, lo and behold, there was an opportunity there.
Yeah. And for people out there, if you want to kind of get a real quick, it's not real because it's a TV show, but a quick example of this, if anybody's read the book Lessons in Chemistry or you watch the TV show Lessons in Chemistry, she talks about Crisco versus tallow in it and the heating points of it and everything like that. So if you're more into pop culture and want to see something like that, go check that out.
Yep. Now, going on it, Ancel Keys, Mr. Keys here, he comes back with this 7-country study that it took him 6 years to publish it. And then immediately he was faced with a little backlash there, like, hey, this is kind of cherry-picked data, that sort of thing. These conclusions are questionable. And then fast forward now to 2013 when with this other study that he had that was basically the continuation of the 7-country study. Like, hey, I'm saying that lower saturated fats intake can prevent heart disease. Now I'm going to show you that higher polyunsaturated fat intake can help you prevent heart disease. And they found the complete opposite. And 2013, the whole thing was found in a basement, hiding in somebody's estate. That's wild right there.
And you can look at graphs and that plot saturated fat intake among the general population and the amount of heart attacks or cardiac events like in time. And you will see that saturated fat intake went down and kind of has remained stable, but heart disease keeps going up and up and up and up and up, or cardiac events. So I want to focus more on the American Heart Association.
Yeah.
If we can move to that.
Yeah, let's go to that. And let's talk about, too, on the way there, like you said, that heart disease it's an uphill climb like that, and it never goes down. There's never a year where we have less deaths from heart disease. It's the number one killer in the U.S. and by a lot. Like it more than double. No, it doesn't more than double. Cancer's the second one, but it beats cancer out. And cancer's pretty common these days. And then it goes up every year. So,
which is interesting, the fact that study showed increased cancer risk with polyunsaturated fats, and that's remained high, and heart diseases remained high, and now cancer. And so it's interesting.
Something to look at. Yeah, something to be curious about. But if we reduce animal fat intakes and we've popularized the use of pharmaceutical products like statins, so reducing people's cholesterol levels as a preventative measure of heart disease is a very common practice and has been for a long time. But our heart disease numbers keep going up. What is going on? Right.
And so this is where I want you to remember that two things can be true. The American Heart Association is good, right? I just had my CPR and AED recertification through them. I think it's a wonderful thing that people are educated on how to provide life-saving care at a moment's notice if needed. Okay, that's great. They also do a lot to promote awareness of risks for heart disease. Okay, however, even though the Ancel Keys study has been debunked, they still put out guidelines that are a product of his results to have people lower their LDL, so their quote unquote bad cholesterol, and not eat saturated fat. Okay, now what were you gonna say?
Food pyramid. Tying that in, the food pyramid as we know it, where you have these, consume a lot of grains and then minimize animal products at the top.
We can go on a whole episode of the food pyramid because that's a lot to do with. I mean, I'd have to look more into it to get the actual facts, but that was a lot. Like money went to farmers to create grain. There's a surplus of grain. Oh crap! What do we do? Well, let's tell people to eat more grain.
Yeah, there's a sugar lobby, a grain lobby was involved in that, but it is guided by the 7-country study.
Yeah.
So it's very closely related to what the 7-country study found.
Which government involvement in how we eat blows my mind.
Explain.
Because like the food pyramid, and then this is just a little bit of a tangent, but I remember listening to a podcast, because podcasts are great to listen to get information, right? But I was listening to a podcast do you know that true original sushi does not have salmon?
I do.
Yeah. Do you know why salmon is common in sushi now?
Salmon was an import to Japan from the Norwegian countries.
So the Norwegian, they put a ton of money into salmon.
Yep. And
it went really well. And now they had a surplus. And they're like, crap, how do we get rid of it? Let's give it to the Japanese to put on sushi.
Yep. So and it has something to do there with a little bit of colonialism and this sort of thing. But that's
a government influence on how we eat now.
Yeah,
and most
they're basically
of us
unloading
are
a surplus.
Completely unaware.
Yep. I mean, and then it kind of looks, not to say that salmon's bad for you, but it kind of looks like, hey, I have this stuff left over that cost me a lot of money to get rid of. Let me just sell it to people. like it's food, type of thing.
Like,
so
yeah.
So yeah, it's very interesting. Now, a lot of going back to it, that 7-country study from Ancel Keys, that's why we're talking about him. That influenced the food pyramid that we all know and love, that we were taught at school. Like, this is how you eat if you want to be healthy.
Right.
And it influenced the dietary guidelines, a lot of the dietary guidelines that the mainstream gives you.
Right.
Like the Harvard Medical Association, all these people.
Right. So Procter & Gamble gives the American Heart Association a ton of money as long as, and I might be adding this a little bit, as long as they promote Ancel Keys, because then that's going to drive people to do more Crisco. Mm-hmm. Okay. This is very simplified explanations. I'm sure there's much more involved. Okay. Now, so what does that matter? The American Heart Association promotes that. That's it. Okay. Well, it's not okay, because the American Heart Association is not a government agency. I thought they were.
So did I. And I'm sure that many people just heard this and they're like, it's not a government association.
But they have very, very close relationship with Harvard Medical, which Dan alluded to. Okay. And Harvard Medical influences government food policy. So it's almost like American Heart Association indirectly influenced government agency. Now, the U.S. government nutritional guidelines are determined by the Dietary Guidelines of America, or DGA. Their committee members of the DGA are either past or current American Heart Association members. Okay. Now, the DGA determines what foods are available for SNAP, hospitals, nursing homes, schools, colleges. Okay? So you see how this trickle-down effect, Procter & Gamble pumps up American Heart Association. I can't say AHA quickly. Okay? Then they influence Harvard Medical, who influences the DGA, who
American
puts the
Heart
food on your table.
Association funds 7-country study. Don't forget that part. Yep.
The DGA also influences the Department of Agriculture to determine what crops are subsidized, which means what crops are grown, what the cost of these are, so what's on your menus and what's in the grocery stores.
And we go back, when you say crops subsidized, we go back to a few episodes when we were talking about what is actually healthy. When you subsidize something, meaning the government pumps money into it to make it more readily available, guess what that means? You're about to get that thing everywhere. So it's going to be more accessible to more people, and it gets propped up as this great thing. And subsidies can be good, but not if they're coming from this place of, hey, we want to sell a lot of this, and I put more money in somebody's pocket, so you're going to subsidize my stuff, even though it's not the best thing for everybody.
Right.
Okay.
And so the American Heart Association is indirectly affecting these people who affect what foods we're exposed to regularly, and the recommendations we're given, especially in schools and other things like that. Okay. They also, how do they influence medical providers? Okay. Well, the American Heart Association is so big that other organizations look up to them, such as the American Diabetes Association, the American Oncology Association, so for cancer, the American Medical Association, and the American College of Physicians. Okay?
Pause, going back to the DGA. Go.
No, yeah, go ahead.
No, going back to the DGA, little insert there. This lady from the DGA, Harvard Medical Association type lady, doctor, her first name's Fatima. I don't know the last name, but famous, viral 60-minute clip from an interview with her where she basically made the bold proclamation that obesity is completely genetic and there's nothing that you can do about it.
Yeah.
Okay. This lady sits on the Dietary Guidelines Association.
I didn't. Okay.
Yes, she's tied to Harvard Medical and the Dietary Guidelines
She's
Association.
also tied to pharmaceutical companies. But it's okay.
She's tied to pharmaceutical companies? No way.
Yeah.
No way.
The thing that, one last on my soapbox about the American Heart Association, who I just said, I got recertified through them, but they also publish or co-publish 14 medical journals. Okay, so what's the big deal with that? When you're a medical provider in a busy practice and you're seeing 20 to 30 patients a day and, you're trying to balance spending time with your kids, making time for yourself, you have to do stress management as well, right? but you also need to stay on top of the most relevant information, complete continuing medical education, all these things. So where do you get that from? You get that from medical journals because they put studies in very simple, like concise terms. So you read an article, you can get CME for it, and now you're up to date on what's the most newest recommendation. Okay, so the American Heart Association publishes or co-publishes 14 medical journals, and they put billions of dollars and have for many, many years in medical research, okay? So they fund research, which means they're the ones who study this, not that, okay?
And study it this way, not this way.
Yes, and so that's why the American Heart Association has not done a study to challenge Ancel Keys, even though external organizations will and have found, like Ancel Keys is debunked. It's, it's not accurate. But the American Heart Association will not do it because then that would, I just imagine like a deck of cards, like a card thing falling.
Dominoes falling.
It'd be a domino effect of all of their recommendations and everything they've based off of, and probably bastardize their relationship with Procter & Gamble.
Not only that, but we just told you that the Ancel Keys 7-country study was commissioned in 1958 and published in 1960.
Yeah.
So we're talking, 60 some odd years at this point of information pumped into the mainstream that could be easily verified as false. And then if you put a study behind it, then it would really, for 65 years, we've been telling you this, and turns out we were wrong.
Yep.
So that's a paradigm shift. That's mind blowing right there.
So I think it's always interesting, and this is, I've been a primary care physician assistant since 2012, okay? I remember when I was first practicing, it was a sense of achievement if I could get somebody's LDL down, and we'll talk about the reasons why that's sort of made a sense of achievement for providers. But when I started looking into this stuff, like we mentioned earlier in this episode, I felt very challenged. I think that sometimes when Dan and I first had conversations where he challenged my conventional education, I would get angry. I was like, I completed grad school, I know. But it's like, we don't, okay? And I had to really humble myself and stay curious and expand my knowledge. And I think I'm so much better off being able to look at things from both sides.
Yeah, no doubt. And I definitely, I've always been a skeptic in regards. I don't know why. I remember myself as a teenager going to my pediatrician, even before that, and asking. I have a doctor in the family, my aunt, a family medicine doctor, and she would tell me things. I'd be like, but why? This is just the way I'm wired. I can't help it. I'm naturally rebellious. And I want to question things. I can't. But so when I was questioning Janie, I didn't know as much as I know now. I was just being a little butthole. You know what I mean? I was just being my normal rebellious self of questioning everything. Maybe that's why our marriage is so solid, because you survived that. I was just being a little butthole. But now, lo and behold, looking at stuff later on, I was like, oh crap. This intuition, this gut feeling that I had on certain things turned out to be not completely misguided or unfounded, And I think that's important. People that want to question the norm and that's who we're trying to talk to here. You know that something isn't right, but you haven't tied certain things together. And listen, I'm not saying we have all the answers, because we're still learning. Every day we see something. I didn't know until I started researching about this part where they found this full study in dead dude's estate that he held on to since 1973 because it completely disproved his theory.
Yeah.
That's crazy. That's wild to me. And I'm like, and part of me is like, well, I'm not surprised. But then I'm like, holy crap, that really is something.
And we understand that there's also so much more into this. We just are trying to be, sensitive to time and not going too in depth, because we want to keep this at a very accessible level for everybody, to where you're not getting brain pain from trying to process everything we're saying. We don't want to come off the top rope like Macho Man on you. It definitely is more about,
I want to poke people into the direction of, let me look into this a little bit more. Because listen, we didn't have to go too deep into the internet to find this stuff.
This is on Wikipedia.
This is on Wikipedia.
We didn't get all of it from Wikipedia.
We didn't get all of it from Wikipedia. You know, Janie's read a lot on this topic over a couple books, but it is, when I sit down and research it, I find this stuff like that. It's found super quick. And you'll find that a lot of things that we question, that you just got to read a little bit, and you do not have to go deep into the internet to find it. Let's talk about statins for a little bit, because it seems like obviously two things happened off of Ancel Keys, you know, that are big money makers: the food pyramid, Crisco, you know, type stuff, and then we have the use of statins.
Yeah, so I think statins first came out in 57. I wrote it down somewhere. Yeah, 87, excuse me, not 57, 1987. The first, I think pravastatin was the first one that came out. Now, again, two things can be true, okay? There are a set of people who truly do benefit from statins, okay? Those are going to be the familial hypercholesterolemia people, so the people who just naturally produce way more cholesterol, which can cause issues. Okay. That's a set of people. And there is some evidence out there that statins have a bit of an anti-inflammatory effect that's more impactful than I think people give it credit for, because heart disease and heart attacks are not caused by cholesterol alone. Okay. Cholesterol is the patchwork, because some inflammation and disruption of the lining of the arteries has occurred. And the reason why it's occurred is because of inflammation in the body, because of either high blood pressure, high blood sugar, or just other things causing inflammation. You know, whole list we can go through: environmental toxins, stress, mitochondrial dysfunction. And so the origin of why this is all occurring, why is cholesterol accumulating in the arteries? Let's figure that out and treat that, I think would be highly beneficial. Now, if damage is done and then there's cholesterol blocked, that's different, okay? And statins may provide some benefit in that regard, and the risk versus reward of them may be more worth it. But we're talking more about for primary prevention. You're walking around, you haven't had a cardiac event, your family history isn't riddled with heart disease,
and your cholesterol is
trending up. Okay,
it's high.
That's what we're focusing on more. And we're not saying don't ever take a statin. I'm not saying if you're taking a statin, stop it. Have a conversation with your physician. What's my absolute risk? Is there further additional studies I can do to help determine that risk? Are there alternatives to statins? Like, I see far too many people being told X, Y, and Z is on your medical history. You need a statin. And they go, yes, sir. And then they take it. And then that's it.
I'll also point to, and this is just me over here talking like a regular person asking questions. When you talk to people about blood work, they point to their cholesterol immediately and overlook other stuff, like, say, high fasting blood glucose, high A1C,
high triglycerides.
They completely disregard that.
High density lipoprotein, or HDL.
They completely disregard that, but but my cholesterol looks good. Then they'll give you that, and they're usually on a statin as well.
Yeah.
But going to what happened last year, so no, not last year. Now it's 2023 when they came out with this. And the AHA is involved in this, which immediately makes my tinfoil hat tingle. What's going on? What's coming down the pipes that they're getting ready for? The AHA, the American Heart Association, was involved in this determination. They changed the screening criteria for risk of heart disease. So the 10-year outlook on people's risk of heart disease, which you can speak better to, they used certain criteria before. They changed it, and to something that they're claiming is more accurate, more encompassing, more comprehensive. And they came out and said that, you know what, using this new criteria, it turns out that there are a lot of people on statins that don't need to be on statins now. And the estimate that they put out, again, American Heart Association is involved in this information. So you take that, you know, the people that everybody listens to that think that everybody thinks are a government agency and turns out they're not. These people are saying that there's over 40% of people on statins that don't need to be taking that medication because the new updated screening criteria for future heart disease risk shows that they're actually not as high risk as they were made out to be by the criteria they were using previously. That means, you know, there's millions of people in this country that are taking statins. Yeah. So that means that there's millions of people potentially, up to, listen to my numbers, 40%, guys, that are taking a prescription that they didn't need to take. So does that mean that, you know, we're going to refund back for the amount of money spent being on statins for a number of years that you didn't need to be on? Of course not. They're going to do that, but they're not going to do that. But think about how much money exchanged hands there by people getting put on statins for years and they didn't need to be on them. Goes back to that follow the money thing. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And so statins, if you're on a statin and you're, you know, you were kind of surprised when you were told that you needed to be on one, maybe you fall into this 40%, maybe you don't, have a conversation with your healthcare provider. If you have a good relationship with your healthcare provider and you know, take them this study or just ask them like, hey, can we reevaluate my risk or can we do additional testing like a CT calcium score? Coronary angiography is a little bit more invasive. I wouldn't really recommend that as just like your first baseline screening. Or trying some alternative measures and continuing to follow your lipids, because I have seen so many people being put on statins who and it's because of the recommendations have changed where I'm like, I don't know why they're on a statin. Okay. And statins have a slew of side effects. And so I think it's worth having a conversation with your provider. Like I said, now, if you bring this up to your provider and they're like, don't confuse my medical degree with your Google search. Okay. Then find a new provider, because that does not mean that this provider is open to having a discussion. They just want to check the box, put you on a statin, get the reimbursement because they fixed a problem. They fixed a problem.
Show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcomes.
Yeah.
Warren Buffett. So when we say that people are incentivized to put people on certain medications and push certain pharmaceuticals, I make that statement and people think that, you know, the doctor is directly getting paid out for putting you on a certain medication. No. And that's not always the case. Although there are certain scenarios where that is possible, where the doctor, the primary care physician or whatever, can get directly paid out, like almost like a commission from pushing a certain pharmaceutical. We saw that during the opiate crisis, which we'll talk about in a future episode. But you think about it, if they code you a certain way, Janie, you can explain this better than me. If they say, okay, I saw this person for a visit, I put them on a statin, just thinking here, using this statin as an example, not saying that this is the case. You code that visit differently. The reimbursement from the health insurer is completely different. So if he just saw you, let's say, you know, arbitrary numbers, they would have paid out $100 for the visit. Now he put you on a statin, they're going to pay out $120. I'm using, again, just random numbers. Okay. So you see how there's an incentive there. What does that mean when you get reimbursed more to the practice, that at the end of the year, somebody who's, hey, you had this many visits and you quote unquote helped this many people by putting them on these medications to help them manage, not cure, their situation, we're going to give you a bonus at the end of the year. So there's an indirect incentive. We say they're incentivized, but there's this very indirect way in which their bottom line, their personal revenue can be affected by doling out certain medications. Make sense?
Yeah.
What do you?
Yes. And so there's a couple ways that there could be incentives there. Now, visits are coded based on time or complexity of visit. Okay. If I spend more time counseling you, then I can bill for a higher complexity of visit because I put a lot of time in it, okay? But if I say I was counseling somebody on their cholesterol and same amount of time, okay? One person I discussed diet and lifestyle and, you know, maybe supplements or something that they could take, but it was nothing that I gave them, it was just all over the counter that they have to get on their own, which you could argue is more impactful, that is going to be coded as lesser complexity, less reimbursement than if I reviewed your lipids with you and put you on a statin. Me prescribing a medication levels up the complexity, okay? Which I think having the knowledge of nutrition and exercise and relaying that information to a patient is way more impactful and takes more knowledge than being able to read the indications for a medication, click a button, and send to a pharmacy, okay? Also, there's something called HEDIS measures. If you're a healthcare provider, you know what HEDIS measures are. It is the healthcare effectiveness data information set. And this is good and, two things can be true. It can be great and it can be kind of shady, okay? It's great because it helps keep providers up on the most recent recommendations and provide effective care. Meaning, anytime somebody walks in with like a bronchitis, a cough for 2 days, and you give them a Z-Pak, you can be penalized for that because that's not good care. It's likely viral. You're putting them on an antibiotic unnecessarily, okay? However, if a patient has an LDL of this amount and you put them on a statin, you can be rewarded. You're paid to meet standards, okay? So it goes into question, do these standards have the best interest in mind? A better example, I met the standards of getting a patient's A1C down, but she was on 5 medications and nobody had counseled her on her diet. I was a later provider who kind of acquired her. And I was like, what are we doing for this patient? We're driving her glucose down with medication after medication after medication, but nobody's counseling her on her diet. We're not helping her. We're just satisfying a number. When did that become healthcare? Where we're more concerned about numbers than the actual patient. And so I get very frustrated with being told to meet HEDIS measures when they don't have the patient's best interest in mind.
And that'll tie into to our closing position, and it's fine for the day. Before I go there, I am going to exhort you. I'm going to challenge the curious minds out there that are listening and to do some homework. I want you to look up the roles that cholesterol play in the body, because cholesterol is not a foreign substance to your body. It is a very naturally occurring and very, very, all caps, necessary part of bodily function. Okay, so what role does cholesterol play in, say, cell healing? What role does cholesterol play in brain function? What role does cholesterol play in hormone production? Okay, wound healing, things like that. These are all processes that are affected by cholesterol. Vitamin D absorption, which we know that vitamin D is one of those super important vitamins in the body because it's hormone production, immune function, they're all affected by vitamin D. Bone integrity and bone density are affected by vitamin D. And guess what? You need cholesterol to absorb vitamin D for your body to actually use it. You need cholesterol
to create vitamin D. So we create vitamin D. It's the only vitamin we create on our own. So through sunlight being absorbed into the skin, mixes with cholesterol, forms vitamin D. Very simplified. I'm sure if there's like a biochemist or like somebody out there like, that's not everything.
Yeah, but there you go. Cholesterol plays a role in that. So I would exhort you to, just look this stuff up. Look what roles cholesterol plays in the body.
Right.
You're going to be researching for a good amount of time because it's very important substance in your body. And then we'll go from there. We'll rekindle this conversation after we talk about that.
And I think it's important to note that statins, you take a statin and it's not like focuses only on cholesterol. Very rarely is there a medication you take and it focuses only on one thing, okay? Statins inhibit cholesterol along with other things, including CoQ10, so coenzyme Q, yeah. And a lot of these things that statins inhibit play to some of the things you mentioned: cell integrity, the ability of your cells to kind of band together tightly to not allow permeability, so things to slip through.
This is where a lot of people, one of the side effects of statins is chronic tendinopathy, where people will get a little bit of tendinitis and it never goes away. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Myalgias are a common thing. There's also a slew of side effects that I don't think are commonly talked about, like
leg cramps.
Yes, the leg cramps. mood issues with statins, memory, word recall, which then, because they take a statin and then they start to have issues with their memory and word recall, they're less likely to recall that, oh, this started when I started taking my statin. Okay. Sleep problems, liver inflammation, feeling weak, nerve pain, GI disruption. And the thing that I've read this numerous times, and I think I purposely try to forget it because I just get angry about it each time. Statins can increase your risk of diabetes, but it's called an accepted side effect because the risk is worth it.
Because they're lowering your cholesterol.
But diabetes is a risk of heart disease. So it's just like
So if you increase your risk of diabetes, let's say you get diabetes, having diabetes, type 2 diabetes here, we're talking,
you need to be on a statin if you have type 2 diabetes.
Type 2 diabetes increases your risk of heart disease. There you go. So guys, going back to it, my challenge, go do homework on the roles of cholesterol in your body. Now we're going to talk about something that came out recently where JP Morgan, their annual meeting, of investors and all these people that move a lot of money in the stock market, where they basically went in on the medical system and a quiet part out loud type stuff. They said that healing patients is not good for business. Quiet part out loud, guys. We knew this.
Yeah.
We knew that if you heal somebody and you resolve let's say you're trending towards type 2 diabetes, your A1C super high, your blood glucose super high, but you're not quite there, and we get you to do something lifestyle-wise that reverses your course and gets you back on the more normal side of things, that's not good for business.
No, you go to the doctor less. You're not filling prescriptions.
Exactly.
You're not getting as much blood work. You're not seeing specialists.
Yep. So they basically admitted, as investors, they don't like the idea of healing and curing diseases because all these products are going to sell less. Now, you have to look at how much money pharmaceutical companies make and how much money they move out in the ether. If you get pharmaceutical companies making less money because people are healthier in general, then what's going to get all the downstream effects of that, like marketing dollars, all these TV channels and all these news outlets, their main contributor to their bottom line is made through marketing, right? People that pay for advertising on their channels. Guess who pays for most of the advertising in these channels? Freaking pharmaceutical companies. Let's go back to the Super Bowl that just happened a couple weeks ago. How many commercials were pharmaceutical company? It was all junk food and pharmaceuticals and alcohol. There you go. That's all. These are the people that spent the most money to pay for a Super Bowl ad to advertise their crap to you. Shitty food, alcohol, pharmaceuticals. There you go, guys. I just told you what all the Super Bowl commercials were.
And everyone probably, not everyone, but I'm sure there's a large amount of Americans out there, drinking a beer, eating junk food, being like, it's fine because I'm on my Lipitor and Lisinopril. So it's fine.
Yeah. So listen, it's fine, guys. It's okay. Statins, over 40% of statins, apparently, according to the AHA, don't need to be in circulation. It's fine that for years we've been slanging anti-cholesterol medications like they're hotcakes and you're Oprah. You get a statin, you get a statin, you get a statin. But heart disease goes up every year. It's fine. It's fine. So the question here in closing is, what are we really solving when we continue to over-rely on the pharmaceutical answer and we never want to look at the lifestyle connection in depth?
Right.
Makes sense? Because it gets dismissed because we're sitting here waiting for a pharmaceutical answer. I promise you that heart disease, and I'll put a lot of money on this, again, all these bets that I want to make and nobody wants to take you up on them. I'll put a lot of money on the fact that heart disease isn't increasing because we don't have more access to statins.
Right.
Makes sense? Same way obesity isn't increasing because we don't have more access to Wegovy.
Right. Yep.
So something to think about.
Definitely reach out to us on our Instagram at Achieve the Lifestyle. Email us at info@achievethelifestyle.com. If you have questions, you want to work with us about okay, I'm on a statin or I've been told I need a statin. So we can help you figure out how to talk to your doctor, what to say, what questions to ask. I'm never going to tell you to not be on a statin if that's what's needed, but if you want more information, which you have the right to have, I can help you figure out how to best word that and approach that with your provider. And I want to end with just this thought. With heart disease and diabetes and all these things, has anyone else noticed that when we come out with a medication for a disease, it tends to become more prevalent? We have Prozac for depression. Why is depression higher than ever now that we have more medications?
Oh, Lord,
we have
Lord.
so many blood pressure medications. Why is there so much blood pressure? We have statins upon statin, and now other types of medications if you can't handle statin. But why do cholesterol issues keep happening? Why does it seem that when we develop a medication to solve or to treat a problem, it's almost like we ignore trying to solve it, so now the problem becomes more rampant? Does anyone else see that and see an issue with that?
Give me my tinfoil hat back. You didn't ask to borrow my hat. Listen, that is a great question. That is a great way to end it. Just sit with that for a second. And then if you feel so inclined, which I would challenge you to, hey, listen, don't take my word for it. Don't take her word for it. Look the stuff up yourself. Get in there. Do a little research for yourself and answer some of those questions that are burning in the back of your head. At worst, next time you go see your doctor, you can ask better questions. And that's what it all comes down to. Ask better questions and you'll find better answers. So remember, there's ways to navigate this. You just got to be crazy enough to look for the way, okay? To look for the answers. Yeah. And with that, we're out. Thanks for listening to the Pharmophobic podcast. If you found this conversation interesting, which I know you did, make sure to follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And also make sure to check us out on Instagram @Achieve the Lifestyle. And if you're interested in pursuing a stronger, healthier, more capable version of yourself, check out our website @AchieveTheLifestyle.com.
The Pharmophobic podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. The views expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not constitute medical, legal, or professional advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare provider before making any medical or wellness decisions. While we discuss pharmaceutical, holistic, and alternative health topics, our content is not a substitute for professional medical guidance.